Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Punisher, or Zone. This movie tells the story of a man who turns the streets of New York City red as he wages a one-man war against the crime syndicate responsible for the death of his wife and 2 kids. Will he be able to eliminate all the crimes that roam the city? Let's find out in Punisher, or Zone.
Punisher, Warzone.
Punisher, Warzone begins by showing a man named Billy Russoti who wants to meet Don Gaetano Cesare, a mobster who is his boss. Due to a slight misunderstanding between them, Billy and Cesare also got into a heated argument and almost sparked bloodshed. Luckily, Billy's right hand, a man named Nicky Donatelli, managed to calm the dispute between them and calm Cesare. Billy and Nicky then leave Cesare's residence while the mafia boss is seen having a dinner party with his henchmen. Not long after, a man named Frank Castle infiltrated Cesare's residence and massacred everyone there, including Cesare. Meanwhile, 2 police officers who were monitoring the situation outside Cesare's residence heard gunshots from inside the house and rushed in to check the situation. A policeman named Safiotti accidentally met Frank, who was just about to leave after killing Cesare and all his men. Safiotti then pointed his gun at Frank. However, after finding out who Frank Castle really was, Safiotti instead let him go and even handed him the keys to his car so he could quickly escape from there. After that, Safiotti punched himself in the nose until he bled and acted as if Frank had hit him when he was about to catch Frank. Safiotti and his partner then called for reinforcements, and when the police arrived at the scene, he made up a story about Frank hitting him and running away after stealing his car. Meanwhile, in another place, 3 men who are members of the Urban Free Flow gang and Billy's men came to Billy at his headquarters. The 3 men turn out to be drug couriers who Billy often employs because of their abilities. On the other side, unbeknownst to Billy and his henchmen, Frank had already infiltrated there and killed several of Billy's men who were guarding outside. Frank kills Billy's other henchmen and accidentally kills Nicky, who turns out to be an undercover FBI agent. Frank and Billy had a shootout before Billy accidentally fell into a glass-crushing machine that left him hideously disfigured. Although his face was badly injured, Billy managed to survive. After Frank slaughtered all of Billy's men, he hurried away from there. The next day at Nicky Donatelli's funeral, Paul Budiansky, the FBI male agent who is also Nicky's partner, looks furious at his senior, Agent Miller, who has assigned Nicky on a dangerous mission involving Billy Russoti and his notorious henchmen. However, Miller quipped by saying that he did not anticipate the appearance of Frank Castle, who would kill all of Cesare's henchmen, including Billy Russoti and his men. Paul then meets Nicky's wife, Angela, and promises her that he will catch Frank Castle, the person who killed Nicky. Frank apparently attended Nicky's funeral from a distance and visited the graves of his family who were also there. Frank recalled painful memories of the massacre of his family, which made him very tormented and the reason for all the vigilante actions he had done so far. After that, Paul went to the local police station, where he questioned the incompetent performance of the police in arresting Frank Castle, nicknamed the Punisher, who had always been acting as a vigilante for the past 4 years. There was a heated debate between the police and Paul, before finally, Safiotti suggested that Paul meet a male police officer named Martin Soap who has conducted a series of investigations related to Frank Castle. Martin explains to Paul that Frank was a former Special Forces member who lost his wife and daughter, who were killed by the mafia. After the death of his family, Frank dedicated his life to fighting crime in his own way and not following anyone's rules because he has a principle that not all criminals get the punishment they deserve, so he will punish them in his own way, which he thinks is very fair. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Frank reveals to one of his henchmen, a man nicknamed Microchip, that he has killed an innocent FBI agent. Frank felt very guilty, especially after learning that the man had a wife and daughter who loved him very much. Frank could understand their loss from having experienced something similar. Microchip came there to hand over the weapons and equipment Frank needed. Microchip is a very reliable informant. He tries to comfort Frank, but Frank tells him to leave him alone. On the other hand, Billy gets information from his men about the real identity of Nicky Donatelli, who is an FBI agent. Not only that, they also said that all this time, all the money from drug sales was kept by Nicky. One of Billy's men, a man named Pitsy, said that he knew Nicky's home address and believed that the money was held at Nicky's house. After that, a doctor entered the room and was about to remove the bandage covering Billy's face. But apparently, the doctor was unable to perform surgery on Billy's face because his face looked even more terrifying, causing one of his subordinates, a man named Ink, to vomit. After all, he could not bear to see Billy's ugly face. Pitsy then takes Ink out and scolds him for being presumptuous. When they return to the room, Billy had apparently killed the doctor for failing to perform an operation on his face. On the way, Billy explains his plan to Ink and Pitsy, which is to get his money back and kill Frank Castle. The scene then switches and shows the atmosphere in a treatment room at a mental hospital, where Jim, Billy's younger brother, is a prisoner there and is treated very rudely by a male nurse. Jim is a psychopath and a murderer who is so vicious that they must restrain him tightly to keep the man from putting up a fight. Not long after, Billy and his men barged in there and immediately freed Jim. Jim looks surprised by the drastic change in his brother's face but thinks it's fantastic because Billy looks even more scary and dangerous with his new appearance. After finally being freed from his bonds, Jim then tortured the nurse who had treated him harshly and then killed him sadistically and brutally. When the four of them entered a hotel, Billy looked very shocked and devastated when he saw his reflection in the mirror. Jim then calms him down and promises to help him kill Frank and take revenge on the man. Jim also smashed all the mirrors there to make Billy feel better. In the evening, Frank comes to Nikki's house to meet Angela. Frank comes there to apologize for killing Nikki and gives Angela some cash as an apology. However, Angela instead points a gun at Frank and chases him out of her house. Elsewhere, Billy and his henchmen are seen having a meeting with a drug lord named Christou. One of Christou's men deliberately insulted Billy's face, which made Billy angry and he killed him immediately. A fight almost broke out between them, but Christou managed to calm the tension and apologize to Billy. Billy and Christou have finally agreed to carry out a transaction at the dock soon. The next day, Frank meets Microchip at his house and tells him that he will retire as the Punisher and leave town. Microchip then tells Frank that Billy Russoti is still alive and will take revenge on him, so Frank refuses to retire and is determined to kill Billy and his henchmen. Frank then strategizes with Microchip and a man named Carlos who tells him about Billy's henchmen, namely Magenty and the gang, who are about to carry out a robbery. On the other hand, Paul decides to team up with Martin to catch Frank. That night, Frank, who already knew the whereabouts of Magenty and his men, rushed there and slaughtered them. After getting information about Billy, Frank kills Magenty, but at the same time, Paul and Martin, who were also there, saw Frank's appearance and rushed after him. Frank and Paul got into a fierce fight before Frank finally managed to bring Paul down. But as it turns out, it was all Paul's ploy to catch Frank. Frank then asks Paul to let him go because, at this time, Billy and his henchmen are heading to Angela's house to retrieve the drug sales money that Nikki kept, and Frank must save them. However, Paul didn't care about it and kept handcuffing Frank. Elsewhere, Billy and his henchmen come to Angela's house and imprison her with her daughter. Billy asks about the money from drug sales that Nikki may have kept at his house, but Angela said that she knew absolutely nothing about it. While Billy interrogates Angela, Jim makes a fuss by breaking things in the house intentionally. The commotion was heard by two police officers who happened to be patrolling the area. When the police came to Angela's house, Jim brutally killed them both. Angela, who was scared and worried about her daughter's safety, then said that her late husband had a safe in their room and told him the code. On the other hand, Paul finally arrived in front of Angela's house and asked Martin to keep an eye on Frank, who was handcuffed in the back seat while he was about to go inside. After Paul goes inside, Frank then asks Martin to free him because it turns out that Martin is Frank's spy on the police. Inside the house, Ink and Pitsy anticipated Paul's arrival and threatened him not to act rashly if he didn't want Angela and her daughter to be killed. Meanwhile, Billy looks very angry when he finds out that the safe does not contain the money he wants at all. An annoyed Billy then made a fuss, which Jim immediately followed. Hearing this, Pitsy then asked Ink to check upstairs, but then, Frank appeared and immediately beat him. Paul then took the opportunity to grab his gun and was about to kill Pitsy, but Frank killed him first and rushed to take Angela and her daughter away. When Paul tries to stop Frank, Billy and Jim come down from upstairs and shoot him straight away, so Paul has to dodge their shot and is forced to let Frank go. Billy and Jim were finally caught by Paul and Martin and taken to the police station. Meanwhile, Frank takes Angela and her daughter to their hiding place, where he then gives Angela's daughter some of his daughter's toys to cheer up the little girl. Billy and Jim are taken to FBI headquarters, where Agent Miller offers them both freedom, provided they are willing to help the FBI catch Christou and his gang. Without thinking, Billy and Jim agreed. Billy and Jim then head to the docks to make a deal with Christou, where FBI agents are already preparing to ambush Christou and his gang. Because Billy and Jim had helped Agent Miller catch Christou, they were both finally released. Not only that, but Agent Miller also provides information to Billy about Microchip, who is a close friend of Frank Castle. Elsewhere, Carlos tells Frank that Microchip can't see him right now because his mother is sick. Hearing this, Frank asked Carlos to take care of Angela and her daughter while he was going to Microchip's house. However, upon arrival, Frank found Microchip's mother had died in a tragic condition and he did not find Microchip's whereabouts anywhere. Frank rushes back to his hiding place, where he finds Carlos badly injured and dying and realizes that Angela and her daughter have been kidnapped by Jim. Carlos then asked Frank to end his suffering and Frank was forced to shoot him dead. Billy and Jim apparently plan to use Microchip, Angela and her daughter as bait to lure Frank in so they can kill him. After that, Frank is seen having a meeting with Paul, where Paul tells him that Billy and Jim have been released. Paul then asks Frank to try Billy and Jim in his own way as they are both above the law. Frank agrees and tells Paul to give up his badge and his job as a federal agent if he wants to help him. Meanwhile, Billy and Jim are seen going to a bar, where they will recruit some people and get everything ready to launch their revenge action against Frank Castle. While Frank monitors Billy and Jim's hideout, which is heavily guarded by his heavily armed henchmen, Paul visits Christu's father, Tiberiu. He offers to cooperate to take revenge on Billy, the man who had put Christu in prison. Tiberiu agreed to Paul's offer to cooperate without thinking because he wanted revenge for his son. That night, Tiberiu and several of his chosen henchmen visit Billy's place, pretending to be mercenaries who will help him fight the Punisher. Meanwhile, Angela and her daughter and Microchip were seen being held captive in a room in the building. Tiberiu ordered his henchmen to attack Billy's men when they were inside the building. Gunfights are inevitable. While gun battles were going on downstairs, Frank then entered the building from upstairs and managed to kill some of Billy's men. But then, Frank gets into a fierce fight with Jim and he is quite overwhelmed by Frank, who is a highly trained ex-Special Forces member. Jim then escapes and enters the room where the hostages are being held. Billy, who was in the room, then pointed his gun at Microchip, while Jim pointed the tip of his gun at Angela and her daughter. Frank is faced with two choices, where he must choose between his best friend or Angela and her daughter, who must be saved. Frank finally chose to save Angela and her daughter and gave up the death of his best friend who was killed by Billy. After killing Jim, Frank then came at Billy in a rage, beat him to death and killed him with a very painful death. After Frank managed to kill Billy and his gang and save Angela and her daughter, Paul asked him to leave immediately because the police would soon come to arrest him. Angela then hugged Frank and said she had forgiven him for his mistake. When Frank and Martin go out together, Martin tries to convince Frank to give up his vigilante status after he manages to kill every criminal in town. However, Martin quickly changed his mind when he was suddenly held up by a mugger, who quickly became a victim of the Punisher. The moral that we can learn from this film is that we never hesitate to fight the injustice that is happening around us, even though we have our own way that may be considered excessive and against the applicable law. Because sometimes, the laws that apply in our country are not enforced properly and may just be considered an easy game for those in power.